Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to a rather unsettling evening with Mr. Bennett. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You wouldn't want to miss a single nightmare, would you? Now, let us begin. The stories of kids wandering too far into the woods, never to be found or heard from again, seemed nothing more than a way to scare us into staying close to town. Or so we thought. It was the start of summer vacation, no school for 3 months, just freedom. The first week started like many before. I woke up, grabbed breakfast, and met Jim and James by the edge of the forest. We spent our days exploring, shooting our BB guns, and catching brook trout in the river. There was one area we never ventured past, though, an imposing set of cliffs with a waterfall that loomed over a dense valley. The cliffs always seemed dangerous, but more than that, the stories about the witch kept us away. But on that particular day, something changed. James suggested we climb the cliffs, and neither Jim nor I objected. So, with the confidence only 12-year-old boys can have, we set off to see what lay beyond. We reached the top quicker than expected and looked out over a vast valley blanketed with pine trees as far as the eye could see. To us, it was a magical place, inviting us to explore. We followed the river into the valley, unaware that we were entering a place where those old, terrifying stories came to life. As dusk approached, an overwhelming sense of dread filled the air. We heard a hideous, cackling sound echoing from the trees, far more sinister than anything we'd ever heard before. Before we could react, something began moving toward us quickly through the dense forest. We caught brief, terrifying glimpses of it as it darted between the trees. Then everything went black. I awoke in a panic. It was pitch black, and I was alone. I called out to my friends, but there was no response. I could see the flicker of a fire in the distance and thought, perhaps, they had built it. But then I remembered, the cackle. And the thing chasing us. As I cautiously approached the fire, I heard the faint sound of whimpering. And then I heard the words that will haunt me for the rest of my life, please stop eating me. Paralyzed with fear, I crouched behind a tree, barely breathing. I could hear something moving close by, its raspy breaths and the wet smack of its lips. The stench was unbearable. My legs felt like they were encased in concrete. I couldn't run, couldn't even move. Suddenly, I felt a cold, bony hand grip my shoulder. Adrenaline surged through me, and I bolted. I ran blindly through the forest, vomiting from fear and exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Just when I thought I was free, I heard that hideous cackle again, this time right in front of me. Then something hit me, hard. I felt the warmth of my blood pouring from my head as I was dragged back through the forest. Narrator, as Father's journal. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying next to the fire. I was paralyzed, unable to move. Through blurry vision, I saw the dismembered bodies of Jim and James lying nearby. Tears filled my eyes as I realized I was next. Then, out of nowhere, a large bearded man appeared, swinging an axe at the creature on top of me, sending it flying into the fire. He quickly dispatched the creature, beheading it with one swift motion. He turned to me and spoke in broken English, which did. You speak later. He moved me away from the fire and tended to my wounds. I wanted to thank him, but I still couldn't speak. All I could do was stare as he warned me there were more witches in the forest, and I should never return. The next morning, I made my way back to town. The memory of that night haunts me to this day. Narrator, in present day the daughter closed the journal, her heart racing. She never ventured near the forest again. Nor did she ever speak of it. 2004, Louisiana. Mitch was a man whose life seemed perfect on the surface. Fresh out of college, he met Kayla, and after a patient courtship, the two fell deeply in love. They stayed in Louisiana, built careers, got married, and soon welcomed a daughter into the world. Mitch's career flourished, and he was making enough to allow Kayla to stay home and care for their children. Their life, on paper, was idyllic. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the world fell still, Mitch couldn't shake an odd feeling. It began after his son was born. Late one night, as Mitch lounged, a strange heaviness settled over him. He found himself unable to move. Sleep paralysis, he thought. But then, the silence in the room became unnerving. No hum of crickets, no distant traffic, nothing. Just Mitch, locked in place, his eyes darting wildly, trying to make sense of what was happening. His gaze landed on the far corner of the room, where the shadows seemed darker than they should be. Slowly, painfully, he craned his neck, just enough to peer into the dimness. There, standing by a table and chair he hadn't noticed before, was a figure. It was hard to tell at first, but it looked like a woman, her face obscured by a shawl. His heart thundered in his chest as the figure crouched, disappearing from view. He couldn't scream, couldn't move, as the soft sound of something slithering across the floor reached his ears. He could hear her breath, low, raspy, getting closer. Panic flooded his veins as she neared the edge of his bed. This can't be real, he thought. Wake up. But the nightmare only deepened. Suddenly, she bolted from the room, running through the house, crashing into things like a wild animal. Mitch lay frozen, his pulse drumming in his ears, as he heard her stop at the foot of the stairs. She was coming back. Slowly, deliberately, he heard her ascend the steps, one by one, until her head crested the staircase. She turned to face him, and their eyes locked. In an instant, she dropped to all fours and began charging towards him. Terror gripped Mitch as a scream tore from his throat, but just before she reached him, she froze. For a long, unbearable moment, they stared at each other. And then, without a word, she turned and bolted from the room. Silence fell once more. Mitch could finally move. But instead of relief, dread gnawed at him. He wasn't sure if what he had experienced was real or some horrific trick of the mind. But when his mother rushed in, disheveled and panicked, asking if he had been running around the house, Mitch knew this was no ordinary dream. Story 3 Germany, 2012. Simone was 22, and it was her last summer in the picturesque winemaking village of Rudsham am Rhein before she moved to New York. To make the most of her final weeks, she returned to the summer camp where she had once been a camper and now was a counselor. The camp was nestled deep in a forest, far from the lights and sounds of the town. For 2 weeks, the counselors lived in tents set up just inside the tree line, spending their days guiding the children and their nights around the campfire, sharing stories and laughter. But the nights in the forest had their own mysteries. On one especially hot, oppressive evening, Simone couldn't sleep inside her tent. She dragged her cot out into the open air, far enough into the woods that only darkness surrounded her. The air was slightly cooler there, and a few other counselors had done the same. But despite the relief from the heat, something about the night felt off. As she lay there, the sounds of the forest faded into an eerie silence. A prickling sensation crawled over her skin as a sense of dread slowly seeped into her bones. She closed her eyes, desperate to sleep, but the quiet was too loud, too suffocating. When sleep finally came, it brought no peace. Simone was thrust into a nightmare. In her dream, the world was broken, a post-apocalyptic landscape stretched before her, a desert wasteland with crumbling towers. It was empty, eerily empty. And then, from the darkness, something approached. A figure moved toward her, cloaked in shadow, its steps silent. Simone tried to move, but she was paralyzed, trapped in her nightmare as the figure drew closer and closer. And this is where we leave you, teetering on the edge, breath caught in your throat, wondering what lurks in the corners of your room when the lights go out. Until next time, stay curious, but not too curious. After all, some doors should remain closed.